everyone, and welcome. Sorry, I just froze there. My name is Stephanie Bonek. I'm the Director of Education and Curatorial Services for the National First Ladies Library Museum at the First Ladies National Historic Site. I'm so thrilled that you're joining us this evening for a very special Cooking with the First Ladies program, in which we'll be learning a little bit more about Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and specifically the Manhattan Project, which, as I'm sure if you recall from last summer, was quite a buzzword, especially with Oppenheimer versus Barbie. Um, Personally, I saw Barbie, but that's just me. So as you can probably see in the chat, please do feel free to share where you're joining us from this evening. We're so fortunate that it's sunny. It's a little chilly in Northeast Ohio, but it is sunny, so it can always be worse. We've got quite a few participants this evening, so just as a reminder, if you have any questions throughout the program, please feel free to put those in the chat. And closer to the end, I am going to do a quick poll, so please do stick around for that, just so we can get a little bit more insight on what you, our participants, want from our programs and from us. So feel free to keep posting where you're joining us from this evening. But without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Sarah Morgan. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Yay. Hey, y'all. Yeah, again, thanks for being here. But just a little disclaimer about this particular program. It is highly classified. So remember the slogan, what you see here, what you do here, what you hear here. Now, when you leave here, let it stay here. So as a big Oak Ridge slogan. And so just making sure y'all sign the waiver before you join the program this evening. So again, I'm Sarah Morgan, and welcome to Cooking with the First Ladies. They're also my other topic, Cooking with the Caliatron Girls. So also, like Stephanie was saying, but I just wanted to also have you guys put where you're from in the chat, because being that people traveled and moved from everywhere across the country to a secret city, one of the first things that they asked was, where are y'all from? So I'll start. I'm from Tennessee. So before I share more information about these amazing ladies of the Manhattan Project, as well as some of the first ladies, we, as always, are going to start with a cocktail. So spicy margaritas are my absolute favorite go-to drink. And so this is kind of a little play on that. That is also kind of using a atomic cocktail recipe that was popular in Las Vegas back in the 50s. So what we're going to do is, well, we don't need that yet. We are going to take our lime. I really hope that my puppy isn't going wild, or that you can hear him too awful much over there. Einstein. He's excited. He wishes he could participate. And then we are going to take this and we are going to rim it in some tahini, a little extra spicy. I know that the recipe card says to use a cocktail shaker, but I actually don't currently have one. So we are just going to kind of go with it. Okay. So next what we're going to do is we're going to take sparkling water and tequila. All right. I want to be sure it's close enough for y'all to see. There we go. And then we're going to take some orange bitters. Just to taste, however much you like. And a splash of lime. Go. And some jalapenos. Make it extra spicy. And then we're going to garnish it with an orange wedge, which these are blood orange wedges, and a jalapeno. And then the most fun part is we're going to use some sparkling water. And we're going to drop the bomb, which I did not make these. You can order what they call liquor bombs online. I did attempt to make them. Mine didn't work out. So this is just a liquor bomb. And so we're going to drop the bomb. And it fizzes up real nice and super fun. So there you have it, an atomic style cocktail, because after the successful detonation of the gadget during the Trinity test, the atomic age began, and pop culture reflected Americans' obsession with anything and everything nuclear. And in Las Vegas in the 1950s, which was also sometimes referred to as the Atomic City during that time, they had developed this like themed cocktail that people would drink at the Desert Inn while watching the nuclear detonations out in the desert. So cheers. So I'm going to step over here and do a little PowerPoint presentation about these fascinating women before we get back to cooking.
If you're
Yeah, no, good. All right, so most may associate the Manhattan Project with Oppenheimer and Los Alamos, but a small town in Tennessee, tucked away and purposefully hidden in the rural foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, was pivotal in the creation of the atomic bomb. Oak Ridge, Tennessee became home to thousands of families and single adults, in particular women of all different backgrounds, doing a variety of jobs to support the war effort, from raising a family to working in the factories. Now, some of these women were working on a project so secretive, they had no idea exactly what they were actually doing, which was especially the case with the cubicle operators, a position that has been popularized with the term Calyatron girl. One of these ladies, Opal Talbot, made a memorable visit to Oak Ridge slightly more than a year ago to celebrate her 101st birthday. Originally from Kentucky, she moved to the area after graduating from high school upon hearing about job opportunities for young women. Surprisingly, she only discovered the nature of her actual duties in her mid-80s. During her visit, Opal explored the facilities where she had worked as a young girl. This experience was especially profound for her family as they struggled to grasp the significance and the pivotal role it played in altering the course of history through her contributions to the war effort. However, if the term Calyatron girl had been used back then, you most likely would have been arrested or removed from the city, because talking about what was happening in the factories was a major violation of the #1 rule, which was to not discuss your job. For the wives of the time, as today, one of the most important responsibilities was to keep your family fed. These personal stories featured in the cookbook have shed a light on a fascinating, misunderstood, and underrepresented era, which I have the pleasure of sharing with y'all this evening. Cooking Behind the Fence, which I will be referring to, is an amazing glimpse into the lives and stories of the women and families of the Manhattan Project. Whether recruited, brought along, or traveled on their own with the promise of well-paying jobs, these brave women came from all walks of life to an unknown, mud-covered, brand new city in Tennessee to work on a secretive project in order to win World War II. This simple cookbook showcases the stories of food and strangers in an unfamiliar land brought together by war and supported by supper clubs, bootleg liquor, and humanity's greatest equalizer, the desire to feed those you love the most, and more importantly, in the greatest war the world had ever seen. Throughout this past year, I've been spending a significant amount of time in Oak Ridge, which is just under about a 3-hour drive from my home near Nashville. I primarily share my content on social media and have recently collaborated with the American Museum of Science and Energy to showcase these intriguing stories and delightful recipes. Just to set the historical stage, here's a brief overview of the events leading up to the creation of the Manhattan Project after years of reluctance to get involved in what was known and considered a European war, the December 7, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor that forced the United States to join the conflict. What had also been discovered was that the Nazi regime had begun its own path of atomic discovery, and it started working on an unstoppable weapon, prompting a letter written in 1939 by Polish and Jewish scientists and signed by Albert Einstein, alerting President Roosevelt the threat was real and the United States needed to start building a bomb. The Manhattan Project was born and the race to the atomic age was underway. Almost overnight, things changed for families across the country as food began to be rationed. By May of 1942, prices were frozen on almost all everyday goods, starting with sugar and coffee, which FDR especially enjoyed the latter, but everyone in the White House was limited to 1 cup a day. By the spring of 1943, meat, cheese, fats, canned fish, canned milk, and other processed foods were added to the list. With the country suffering through the Great Depression and then shortages of war, Eleanor Roosevelt insisted on running the White House with the same economy that her fellow Americans faced. She said, "It's not fair to ask of others what you are unwilling to do yourself." The Roosevelts adhered to mandatory rationing along with other voluntary wartime home front initiatives, including planting Victory Garden and installed blackout curtains at the White House. Food in the Roosevelt White House was famously poor. Eleanor and her longtime friend and White House cook Henrietta Nesbitt and Cornell University created the 7.5-cent meal, which included deviled eggs, mashed potatoes with a side of tomato sauce, wheat bread, and this provided protein that was cheap and plentiful and nutritional values costing less than 10 cents a person. Another was spaghetti with boiled carrots. 1 pot of water for a whole meal, they said. The Roosevelts often served noodles with any type of meat or vegetable leftovers, as well as bread and butter sandwiches and creative sides. Eleanor admitted many unappetizing meals were served during her time at the White House, but was done on purpose in order to be patriotic and was known as conscious cookery. She stated that during the war, we lived up to rationing strictly. So they did try to not skimp on too much food, Eleanor and Henrietta, because FDR was a 1940s foodie, and they didn't want him to worry about food, but had ideas to stretch, especially the meat supply at the White House. In the Oak Ridge cookbook, Edna Briggs shares a chocolate cake recipe that was her favorite because she could make it without a mixer, since many ladies didn't have some appliances, but she could easily half the recipe if she was too low on sugar. Sugar, of course, was scarce, but some people, including Wanda Massey, had plenty to make her butter fudge because she could use her diabetic husband's sugar rations. Vivian Joyce submitted a recipe for the first cake she ever baked, a Lazy Daisy cake, and recalls standing in line to buy sugar for the recipe with her mother and walking home because gas was also rationed at the time. It's also ironic that she says, quote, "You can be sure that a line will form to help you eat this cake," since lines were a big problem in Oak Ridge during the war. In Oak Ridge, families also participated in 2 patriotic activities that were highly encouraged: growing and canning food. Victory gardens were planted to address shortages, and they utilized local orchards for fruit picking, including peaches and apples, which several of the recipes recalled children collecting for their moms to make desserts, at least when they had enough sugar. Strawberries and blackberries, like those picked by Shirley Connerly for her cobbler, were also abundant in the area. It's actually estimated that by 1943, around 20 million Victory Gardens were planted, and that American housewives alone produced about 4 billion cans and jars of food. I mean, wow. So one of my favorite stories in the cookbook is from Jean Lane, who recalls the challenges of grocery shopping during wartime, including food scarcity and rationing. On one occasion, she went shopping and saw a stack of canned hash labeled special that didn't require ration stamps. Jean bought the 4-can limit, went straight home, added some onions, and served it to her family for dinner. However, it wasn't until later that night, while she was tossing the cans, did she realize that she mistakenly served them Dash, a brand of dog food. She learned her lesson and from then on served more traditional dishes, such as the clam chowder from her home state in New England. Just wondering if she actually ever revealed this to her family prior to contributing it to the cookbook. Dot, who we will actually be making a recipe for later this evening, was an early Calytron worker, and she recalls not being a very good cook and as a young wife relying on Spam a lot. Though it was a blessing as a useful and functional source of meat, she swore that when the war was over, she would never eat it again, and that was a vow she never broke. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which is located a little less than 30 miles west of Knoxville, was the first site chosen for the Manhattan Project in 1942 by General Leslie Groves after he surveyed several locations across the country. Now, choosing this site, which had initially been conceived as one single location to build every component of the gadget, which of course was the nickname for the plutonium bomb that was used during the Trinity test, soon became the first of 3 sites. Now, due to its remote location and hideability tucked into a series of valleys, its access to waterways and railroads, and most importantly, the access to large amounts of electricity being newly produced by the hydroelectric Norris Dam made it ideal. Codenamed Site X for the Clinton Engineer Works, the city's footprint covered some 44,000 acres and was not listed on a map until after the war. It also quickly became the 5th largest city in Tennessee at the time. Now, the fact that the city was not supposed to exceed the work of nearly 10,000 individuals, but yet rose to close to 80,000 in such a short period of time was a big challenge to overcome. Now, one of the first things built was the fences. The entire city was gated as much as possible during the war in order to make sure it remained classified and restricted, hence the title of the city cookbook commemorating the Manhattan Project, Looking Behind the Fence. Now, what wasn't or couldn't be fenced due to tricky terrain was secured by over 300 armed security guards on horseback, patrolling 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. There were 3 checkpoints in order to get in and out of the secret city, and the need for badges and inspections eventually became normal, but was extremely frustrating at first. In Looking Behind the Fence, Peg Thomas, who shares a recipe for Scottish mince, remembers her meticulous preparations to greet her aunt when she arrived from out of state, but forgot to request a visitor's pass for her. She ended up having to leave her Aunt Flo and her baby outside the gate while she acquired one. Even Santa Claus wasn't immune to searches. Now, on top of restricted access from friends and relatives not working on the project, there were banned items which included guns, ammo, and alcohol, all of which were very difficult, if not impossible, to get behind the gates. However, women were kind of the smugglers of alcohol, especially because they would take it, would put it under the babies in the strollers, under dirty bags of diapers, tuck it into their skirts, all sorts of resourcefulness. Now, one of the main restricted items was a camera. Ed Westcott moved to the area in 1942, and his wife, known as one of the founding mothers of Oak Ridge, Esther, came a year later. They were some of the first residents, and his job was to document the story of the Manhattan Project as the only person authorized to have a camera in the secret city. In the cookbook, Miss Westcott provides a family favorite recipe for what she called Paradise Ridge cabbage. On a visit to the city, if you go to the History Museum, you may run into Don Honeycutt, who is Ed and Esther's son-in-law, and hear some of his firsthand stories. Who is one of the local gentlemen I've had the pleasure to speak with while touring around the city. All of the black and white photos in this presentation were all taken by Ed, and when you visit this cool historic city, you'll spot his work as well. New residents not only had to deal with this brand new sprung up overnight city, but housing shortages, long lines everywhere, and the struggles of living in secrecy. However, for many women, this was the first time they had the opportunity to work outside the home, especially in East Tennessee, so they dealt with the difficulties. The pay was also unprecedented for the time and much more than they would be offered in other jobs. Most importantly, they wanted to contribute to the war effort and bring their boys home. For me, it's hard to think about hopping on a train or a bus to move to a city that you've never heard of, possibly not being able to live with your husband, living with strangers, and taking a chance on a secret adventure. Now, although the city had amenities, the time wasn't taken to create actual sidewalks, only boardwalks as they were called. It was a literal mud pit, and there are several stories in the cookbook that reflect one of the main struggles these women had, which included packing a change of clothes and shoes in a paper sack when riding the bus into Knoxville to shop, since people would stare at those dirty Oak Ridgers, later considered just one of those Oak Ridge experiences. June Young, who provides a recipe for champagne punch and cheesecake squares, also recalled the day she went to Oak Ridge to apply for a job, wearing some of her nicest clothing, which included a brand new pair of black suede shoes, but ultimately got super muddy on her way across the turnpike, which wasn't yet paved, to her interview. She thought there was no way she was going to get the job, but they hired her on a spot as a stenographer for the Tennessee Eastman Corporation, which was the chemical company that managed the Y12 plant. So if you weren't getting stuck in the mud or ruining your brand new nylons, you were struggling to have a place to live. During the war, Oak Ridge's population grew so quickly that housing shortages became a major problem. Many families and staff lived in temporary housing, such as hutments and trailers, while others lived in shared housing, such as dorms and single-family homes, such as semestos, which were made of cement and asbestos, and flat tops, as well as apartments. The housing used an alphabet system based on the status level as well as family size. Colleen Rowan Black, who compiled the cookbook, moved to Oak Ridge with her entire family in 1944, where she began working as a leak detector at the K-25 plant. Not long after, she and her husband at the facility, Clifford, who was an engineer, made their way through that alphabet housing system, first living in a Victory cottage, then a flat top, then an E apartment, an A house, and finally a D house, which was kind of the best of the best. By the way, her future hubby won her heart as well by not giving her flowers, but ivory soap flakes from the PX, because at that time it was more romantic. Now, on the screen here, Helen Jernigan has a fun story about living in a D house with 6 other women on Taylor Road. When 2 of the ladies got married and moved out, they were replaced by 2 new ladies, which I think is so interesting, thinking about dealing with a revolving door of roommates. However, these ladies embraced it and they enjoyed cooking and hosting parties, where one dish they served was called the Taylor Road Cheese Shuffle. This dish is actually a cheese souffle, but in the cookbook, it says she thought it was cool as a young person to mispronounce French, and they also love to say, "Mercy buttercups." So the Hutments, which were located in what is known as Happy Valley, specifically were the lowest type of housing, and they were 16 by 16 foot plywood homes that had a central stove, which was removed during the summer months to provide more space to cram an additional 2 people, varying from 4 to 6. They also had windows with no actual screens. They do have a reproduction built of a hutment at the Oak Ridge History Museum that you can experience today. I did have the opportunity to visit last year, and I can't imagine living in that structure, especially in extreme weather conditions. It wasn't even the height of summer here in the South. In early May, it was unbearable, and we were all sweating after just a few minutes. I was offered a free night stay, but had to decline. One of the additional exceptional experiences of visiting this museum is that it was actually the Midtown Community Center, known by the younger crowd back in the day as the Wildcat Den. Segregation, of course, was prevalent during that time, and African American men and women could not live together, regardless of whether or not they were married or had children. And they also had limited access to amenities within the city. Katie Strickland was a janitor who worked at K-25 and was able to take some of the leftover building materials from the plant to make a few pans that she was able to use to make biscuits on her hutment stove. Caddy then would take the biscuits to the guards, who enjoyed them so much they let her have a little bit more time before heading back to the ladies section. I mean, those are quite the biscuits for a booty call, y'all. So today you can actually see one of her biscuit pans on display at the K-25 Atomic History Center. This mysterious town that would become known as Oak Ridge made sure the new residents had activities to take their mind off their work and the secrecy surrounding their new lives. There were movie theaters, bowling alleys, shops, skating rinks, restaurants, community centers, and even sports teams. Jackson Square was the heart of the city, and during World War II was open 24/7 because working round the clock was a necessary element to creating the atomic bomb, paired with the urgency to win the war. Jefferson Circle, another one of the 3 town sites within the gates, was home to not only one of the main bus terminals, but also Jefferson Soda Fountain. Much of the original strip burnt down in the 70s, which also included the original home of the American Museum of Science and Energy, known as AMSI today. However, not only did the museum move to their current location, the soda fountain also reopened, and I had the pleasure of speaking with Oak Ridge historian Ray Smith, and also retired Y12 employee, over breakfast, where I not only enjoyed the food, but learning the origins of the name Calyatron Girl. They even embraced their atomic heritage with menu items like the K25 Atomic Special, the Y12 Breakfast Bomb, and the Fat Man and Little Boy Burgers. Now, one of the unique events they held were dances located on the tennis courts, where especially us ladies could avoid the muddy surfaces. They started each one with Boogie Boogie Bugle Boy by the Andrews Sisters, and they jitterbugged until they appropriately played Sleepy Time Gal to end the night. Now, the first dance was held on a hot July Saturday night in 1944, and today, during the summer months, you can actually still go to a tennis court dance. The Manhattan Project National Historic Park Service in Oak Ridge still continues the tradition, and I had the amazing experience of attending one, including dancing with the park rangers to some of that classic 1940s swing music, where I wasn't just learning some jiving moves, but also earned my junior ranger badge. The city also boasted a diverse religious background with the chapel on the hill, used for a multitude of different faiths, which also included a Jewish community that is one of the most unique in the South. One of the prominent members of the Jewish community at that time was Charmian and Waldo Cohn, who moved as a family into an F house in 1943. Her husband worked as a biochemist who developed techniques to separate isotopes, but he was also a talented cellist and was integral in forming the Oak Ridge Symphony Orchestra and also desegregating Oak Ridge schools, which was done in September of 1945, before Rosa Parks' boycott on the bus and nearly a year before Martin Luther King's monumental I Have a Dream speech, with no violence and virtually no coverage in the press. One of Mrs. Cohn's most requested recipes for symphony get-togethers, various community events, including the Sisterhood of the Jewish Congregation annual food fair, and was served to renowned scientists, was cream of broccoli soup. Now, these ladies had an interesting dynamic behind the fence, which had to have been interesting since secrecy was of the utmost importance and employees were not allowed to talk amongst one another about their jobs. They couldn't share their day with their friends, spouses, or even coworkers who had other positions of employment within the city. They did, of course, have get-togethers for morning coffees reflected in a recipe from Kay for sour cream coffee cake, as well as bridge clubs and sewing circles. But as Violet recalls in the cookbook, they could talk about everything except what their husbands were working on at the plant. Another struggle was riding the bus because the majority of those who moved to the city didn't own a car. The ride was not a great experience unless you were meeting your soulmate, as many women did on what they were later referred to as bus dates to the big city. Others, such as Wanda Freeman, remembers the bus to the grocery was fine, but riding it back home with a baby on one hip and groceries on the other was difficult. Speaking of groceries, Betty Culver, who shares a noodle casserole recipe, recalls pushing a stroller to go get groceries through the mud, which developed muscles she didn't know she had, but also taught her how to prepare simple meals from the staples she kept on hand at home. Many of the women also waited to decide what they would be cooking until they went to the grocery to see what was in stock. Also, in the early days of Oak Ridge, Chris Linehan never knew what she was going to prepare for dinner until she went to the grocery store, and she won't ever forget a menu that she served to her husband and his friends from the plant when they came for dinner on the same day that the pineapple truck came in town. She had so much fruit, she served an entire meal revolving around it that included pineapple juice cocktails, a pineapple and ham entree, a pineapple cheese salad, and a pineapple upside down cake. Quite a lot of pineapple. Some women, such as Mary Cussman, who provides the lasagna recipe, chose not to cook in the early days living in their G house because they didn't want to stand in line for the groceries and instead took advantage of one of the many cafeterias and canteens in the reservation, even though they had long lines too. However, she says, a perk of eating out was at least they didn't have to do the dishes. Many residents experienced food from other areas of the country that they had never had before, such as, of course, grits and different things from the South, while the Northern ladies shared New England rum pie, which Nancy explains was a traditional way to end a meal in the New England region and hoped it may start a new tradition in the South. Several families also had overseas backgrounds, which is reflected in Chinese recipes, as well as Helen Adams' Hungarian goulash. Another way these ladies formed friendships was swapping recipes with another, and some were from the Depression era, which worked well with rations. Colleen Black's eggless, butterless, milkless cake, which she described as not only ingredientless, but tasteless too, but not too bad if you topped it with frosting or whipped cream, made the rounds in Happy Valley in 1944 and was given to her by a fellow resident standing in line for the showers one morning. Now, women played an integral part in the war effort by doing what was normally seen as men's work. They made sure essential industries continued operating while the men were on the front lines. However, the difference was that while some women in other fields knew exactly what their role was in the war efforts, the women of Oak Ridge had a very different experience. I mean, can you imagine being so secretive, even within a gated off protective city, that you can basically not speak to your own coworkers about your job? Now, many of these women also worked in a variety of important jobs, ranging from teachers to homemakers, as well as scientists and plant workers, which was another challenge posed in regards to cooking. Dorothy Silverman recalled not having too much time to cook because she worked 6 days a week, and most of her recipes at that time were made in her Presto pressure cooker. Several of the recipes are also make ahead and described as quick and easy. Another example is Ellen Kite's beef brisket, which can be fixed weeks ahead of time and frozen, as she says. Ellen and her husband Harvey moved to Oak Ridge in 1944, where he began to work as a chemist at the Y-12 plant and later advocated for the creation of the Manhattan Project National Parks. He recalled that he and some of his coworkers suspected that the uranium was for a nuclear weapon, but they weren't for sure until the atomic bomb was used. Other women acted as spies, helping to keep the best secret of all time, whether they wanted to or not, including Helen Brown, who was only 18 at the time. As a Y-12 employee, she was asked to keep tabs on her coworkers, report anyone who was discussing their jobs, and submit papers in the event she overheard anything, which was supposed to be turned over to the fake Acme Insurance Company based in Knoxville. A very strange dynamic, trying to make friends when everyone you meet might be someone potentially trying to get information for villainous reasons. This endeavor also shed light on female scientists of the time, including Lise Meitner, who was critical in discovering nuclear fission, and in Oak Ridge specifically, Virginia Coleman, who worked at the Y-12 plant as a chemist. Now, during the Manhattan Project, nearly 10,000 young women were recruited to work at the Y-12 electromagnetic isotope separation plant in Oak Ridge. Their job was to operate racetracks or arrays, which separated the heavier uranium-238 from the lighter uranium-235. Each machine could only actually extract a tiny fraction of an ounce of uranium each day, even with them running around the clock. Originally hired as what was then known as cubicle operators, later known as the Calytron girls, raised and lowered the voltage on the machines that were such powerful silver electromagnets that they could suck the bobby pins right out of your hair and made screwdrivers stand on end in pockets. They were the largest magnets in the world at the time. I mean, once again, can you imagine working in this type of environment today, not being able to question these strange occurrences, but being so dedicated you actually didn't want to? Now, these remarkable women operated 1,152 Calytrons and produced over 140 pounds of uranium-235, the key fuel for Little Boy, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945. The majority of these women were very young, many of whom had just finished high school. As a result, project administrators initially worried about their age and inexperience given the critical nature of their work. However, these atomic ladies' efficiency in operating the Calutrons surpassed that of trained scientists, and they had the unique ability to not overanalyze the work and simply focus on getting the job done. Now, since the project was so vital to winning the war and Y-12 was working around the clock to produce the uranium, they ended up building K-25 as an additional enrichment plant. The U-shaped plant that ended up being the largest structure in the world at the time was over a mile long, 4 stories high, and you actually needed a bicycle to get from one side to the other. Many of the slender and strong young women worked as climbers, including Colleen Black, who did just that, all over the immense vacuum tubes checking for leaks. I just can't imagine or fathom building something the scale of Y-12, K-25, and all in this short amount of time, back in the 40s, no less. Plus, not to mention the brand new science and technology in these buildings. August 6th and 9th, 1945, of course, revealed to the world what the secret cities had been doing. Bess Truman, who was First Lady at the time, expressed she was disappointed her husband hadn't consulted with her on the decision to drop the atomic bombs. However, the decision, of course, effectively ended World War II and the victory years in America, and the atomic age worldwide began. Many of those working on the Manhattan, from the ladies running the Calutrons to the homemakers and the scientists, felt conflicting emotions after the development of such a catastrophic device that ranged from fear, pride, concern, relief, and most importantly, the question of what comes next. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt shared her thoughts and opinions in her column My Day, both during her time as First Lady and in her post-White House years. In her writings, she brought important issues to the attention of her readers, urging them to reflect deeply on the consequences of major political decisions, such as the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. While she addressed the events of World War II, including her defense of the decision to drop the bomb, Roosevelt called on those in power to prioritize goodwill and recognize the heavy responsibility tied to such knowledge and awareness that carried profound implications for the future of humanity. The subject was undeniably complex, even for a figure like Eleanor Roosevelt, who, of course, her husband's successor, Harry Truman, he referred to her as First Lady of the World. Either way, back in Oak Ridge, there was a celebration in Jackson Square and excitement amongst those who had worked on the project. After the news, some started packing up and heading back to their hometowns, but many stayed and built their lives in Oak Ridge, which is one of the most endearing aspects of the community. These families built something more extraordinary than anyone could imagine, a lasting heritage to this day. Either way, these women, along with their fellow Oak Ridgers, were able to keep one of the biggest secrets in history while also ushering in the atomic age. The entirety of the Manhattan Project was an extraordinary endeavor that will never be imaginable again. Oak Ridge isn't just one of the 3 main secret cities of the Manhattan Project era to me. It's an amazing community in East Tennessee that is not only proud of the previous contributions to ending World War II, but its continued endeavors in the field of nuclear energy. The Oak Ridge National Laboratory houses the world's fastest supercomputer. This facility has also shed light on questions involving presidential assassinations by confirming that the bullets that killed JFK came from the same gun, and also proved Zachary Taylor was not murdered by arsenic, which was, by the way, you can see his fingernail samples on display on an exhibit at ANSI. Also, the very first isotopes used for the treatment of cancers were delivered to a St. Louis hospital less than 1 year after the conclusion of World War II. As a passing thought experiment, consider the lives saved by the radiological cancer treatments worldwide born out of that original research, which brought those weapons and the atomic age into the world stage. Visiting some of these locations today are reminiscent of the city and the original town site days, but much has changed. In Jackson Square, the tasty Big Ed's has replaced Williams Drug Store, but continues the tradition of historic preservation with their memorabilia that you can view while eating great pizza. An interesting note about pizza, it was not popular in Oak Ridge back in the early days of the Manhattan Project. but Jenny passed around her personal pizza recipe that had to be baked on a cookie sheet rather than a pizza pan since she couldn't find one. So kind of as just a final note before we get back to cooking, I love supporting and sharing women's history. And through these recipes, I'm hoping that you and anyone who is willing to experiment with some culinary chemistry is granted a connection with the past. So I just look forward to continuing researching these ladies. All right, y'all, let's get cooking.
So while Sarah's getting ready, I'm going to put a quick poll in. Feel free to fill that out while she's getting ready, and then she's going to start cooking. Sarah, thank you so much. That was super interesting. And what a fun way to bring a little bit of First Lady's history into something that's maybe not as historically known as other narratives in American history.
Absolutely. Okay. All right, let me get this out of the way. And I do have some interesting recipes. We'll put our drink over here. This is Colleen Black, who I have mentioned several times in the presentation, her badge photo here. Also, during the cocktail, I meant to mention this. I have started to do some work with the Los Alamos and the Manhattan Project and comparing the two secret cities. And this is just a really good recipe that could go along with the cocktail. It's called Muriel's TV Crunch. Muriel provided it. I just ironically was reading obituaries, which is how I do a lot of my research, and came across this lady who sadly, has passed away, and came across another Oak Ridge cookbook, which I kind of have back here, which was compiled by the Jewish Community Center in the Secret City. And in her obit, it does say that she was an excellent cook and an excellent hostess and enjoyed having company any day of the week. So on your recipe cards, this is just a really good mix, sort of like a Chex Mix.
I don't
That
know
would
about
be really
you,
fun.
Sarah, but I love making homemade Chex Mix. So when I saw that recipe, I was like, oh, heck yes, I love homemade Chex Mix. The Worcestershire sauce in it is always killer.
Oh, and I could have put way more of that in there. But the recipe that I'm going to make first this evening, or sort of present, because there is several recipes, it was so hard to choose what exactly I was going to do. But it is Ruth Cunningham's one dish chicken dinner. And so for this, she remembers that her mother actually had to like full on debone the chicken, remove the feathers, the whole thing. And that she was thankful that now she does not have to do that anymore, just out of especially convenience. And that she also remembers moving to Oak Ridge, and she did not have enough dishes in order to host and entertain people. They just didn't have enough. And she really wanted to have her husband, who, some of his plant workers over and, entertain like anyone would want to, but did not have enough money, etc., for hosting and entertaining. So her husband goes to Knoxville and comes across a hostess set of dishes, buys them for her, also happens to buy bananas, which is their son's favorite snack, who is, I think, 3 years old, young, and brings it all home. She's so excited. She washes them all, spreads them out on the counter, so they can dry, and leaves the room. A couple minutes later, she hears this big crash and comes running back in. Some of the dishes are on the floor, and one of the banana is gone. And her son, I mean, so sweet. He's over on their wall phone, and he is saying, "Please, God, come help. You got to fix my mama's cups real quick." So very endearing, but she says it's all about perspective in the story, that how she says it in the cookbook. But for this dish, we've got rice. So we're just gonna put that rice in there. It's already of course, cooked, just minute rice. And let's see, what space. And then we're gonna put our chicken on top of that, which is just baked chicken breasts is what I did, and very lightly seasoned. I just did a Himalayan salt, garlic salt, black pepper mix. So just real simple. And then it calls for, you can do peas. It also said you do green beans or lima beans. I just went with peas. I don't have anything against lima beans. Not going to be my main choice. But those are some of the things that you could do. And then it was, any sort of leftover veggies that you have, which was specifically mentioned to be green pepper, onion, and things like that. So we'll just put a little bit of that. But one of the things that I love so much about cooking behind the fence is those types of stories, like the one that I was just telling, is because they do share these really interesting and very much stories that you would never know about until you got into this cookbook. And there's so many interesting ones. Anyway, so we got some cream of chicken soup.
And Sarah, while you're doing that, could you share the name of the cookbook again?
Yes, it is Cooking Behind the Fence. And where you can get that is you can order that from the American Museum of Science and Energy. Or go to Oak Ridge yourself and you can buy it in person at the American Museum of Science and Energy or at the History Museum there. But it's not readily available on things like Amazon and whatnot. The way that I got it was I found out about it and well over a year ago now is when I went to get it. But yeah, you can get it through their website.
Awesome.
And
So you
then,
probably won't find any copies like even on thrift books, right?
yeah, I haven't looked in a really long time. Over a year ago when and then we're gonna put our sauce. I should have gotten a bigger casserole dish, but not a chef, so I try my best. So that seems good. But then what we're gonna do is we'll just put here in a bit, put this in a bigger casserole dish and, bake it just a little bit, warm it up. So Ruth Cunningham, 1-pan dinner dish. This has been well over a year ago though, with the cookbook. Finding it, etc. So, oh, you distracted me asking me about the cookbook. Didn't do the last part. I'm so sorry, y'all. I don't. Can y'all hear the dog? I hope not.
No, you can't really hear anything, Sarah. You're good.
Okay. He,
Carol, one of our participants, actually, while you're doing that, is asking the sauce that you put on top, which is in the recipe card that you all will receive if you haven't already. But could you clarify while you're doing that what the sauce is as you're topping it?
yes, I can. It is cream of chicken soup. And then what this was is you could do milk or water. I did milk, and then it's chicken stock. And then the directions from the cookbook just say to make it to a consistency to be edible. So I I hope that's what I did, but it didn't really elaborate on that. So I just sort of did about, yeah, I guess about half a cup of milk and then another kind of half a cup chicken stock. And we'll see. But then the last thing you do is you're supposed to top it with either biscuits or toasted crackers. Yeah.
Do you have a preference? Would you like the crackers more or do you like the biscuits?
Me?
Mm-hmm.
So this is one dish I've never made. Like I said, I should have put it in my bigger casserole dish, but I'll probably just scoop it out and put it in there, and it'll all be fixed. Personally, I just thought the biscuits sounded really good, so made some, Southern style
Mm-hmm.
buttermilk fluffy biscuits. Just seemed a little better, or a little more unique, I guess. I think it would probably be a little bit more crusty and on top if you did the toasted cracker crumbs.
Okay. I
But I
see
bet
that,
they're
like Ritz
both good.
crackers. Ritz
Yeah,
crackers would
yeah,
be delicious. Yeah, I'm with you.
yeah, yeah, definitely. So there we have that, but I have not made that dish. And but it seems good and it seems very simple. Again, I should have put it in a bigger uh container. Uh, so our next recipe is the square meal sandwich. And this is it's one of my absolute favorite recipes from the cookbook. And I have talked about it a couple different times and forced people to try it. It's just a good one. So, well, okay, I'm not gonna say it's a good one, but it's an interesting one. So this is Mom's Square Meal Sandwich, which is provided by Jeffrey Black in Cooking Behind the Fence. And Jeffrey, his sister, what is Colleen Black. And basically her mom is just one Saturday, she had had enough of all of her children, and they were all asking for all their different various sandwiches and their preferences. And so she had had enough. I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that for sure. And she was like, you know what? I am not a short order cook. No. So I'll show you how to put this one together. I do encourage you to at least try it. It's just so weird. It's so fun. And it's so telling of, people, they had several children, they were working, they were, all sorts of things. And, y'all want different sandwiches. This is it then. So first up, we're going to start with our peanut butter. And I know y'all have the recipe cards, and I don't know if you've looked at them, so you probably know what's coming next.
When I looked at them, I was like, "Oh, Sarah, are you sure this is the right?" Okay, I guess. But I follow another actual food historian as well, similar to you, Sarah, on social media, and he does sandwiches of history. And this is actually very similar to one he did a few weeks ago. And he always decides at the end if he would eat it again. And if he does, he says how he'd like to plus it up. So he'll add more ingredients or spices, something that kind of brings out the complementary flavors. But this is very similar to one he made recently. And when I read the recipe, I was like, oh no, not this again.
So true, so true. So then we've got tuna salad. So we're gonna pop some tuna salad on here. All right. I wonder if anybody in the comments is leaving. They're like, this is enough, had enough. I can't handle this anymore. This is awful. All right. Next up, sliced tomato. Here we go.
Sarah, have you tried this?
Oh yes. Oh yes. I've tried it. I have tried it multiple times actually. I I actually go on a show living in East Tennessee once a month. And the girl Amber, who's awesome, she tried it. my friend Matt at AMC, he has tried it. So it's been tried, and it is determined that maybe this should probably be the last time I present this sandwich besides just talking about it, but G can't not. So we've got, the recipe calls for bacon. I can't cook with bacon. So this is turkey bacon. And then we're gonna top it with some cheese. And then what you would do, and of course, with our limited time, we don't have time, but then you would broil this until your cheese is melty. And there you have it, the square meal sandwich.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe it's one of those recipes that kind of stays in the history books for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, okay, so we got a couple other recipes. Let's see what time. Oh, I'll try to be quick. This one is more just talking about it. This one would be Eleanor Roosevelt's approved creative sides, which of course had all sorts of interesting different things, you know, to do. Just cheap creative sides. This one does come from What's Cooking Los Alamos, which again is the next kind of project I'm adding into the women's history that I'm doing and with the Manhattan Project. And I just was gonna, we're just gonna top a little bit of this with pimento. In the recipe, Clara was her name, suggested you could do deviled ham, you could do tuna salad, anything just on top of your cucumbers. The outside ones, I know it's a little hard to see, is what I follow the exact directions. Cut it in half, scoop out the inside, fill it in. And then the ones kind of that I'm putting the pimento on, these, I just did the cucumber rounds. I did tuna, and then the inside ones are a salmon salad. And then she also suggested topping it with green pepper or pimento. So here we have it. Our Los Alamos Manhattan Project era, Eleanor Roosevelt approved creative side. Very simple to make.
And for anyone that has to sign off, please note that this is being recorded. You will get a recording of this in about 48 hours. So even if you do have to sign off, because we're at 8 o'clock, that is totally fine. I'm going to keep asking questions while Sarah is cooking. And we look forward to seeing you the next time if you are leaving us early. If not, hang out. Feel free to put questions in the Q&A. And Sarah, while you're preparing that, someone did ask, did any of the women get sick while working on them, while working on this?
With in regards to like radiation or
Yes.
actually that's a great question. It's what I'm doing really quick. I'm making Bess Truman's pound cake. And I will answer that question while I'm mixing it up. But another cookbook I came across recently, which is just right back here, is from CHIEF, the College Health Indian Education Foundation, and it's from 1971, and it's from Oklahoma, and it's favorite recipes of our first ladies. And Bess in here provides this pound cake recipe, and in it, she actually notes that she thought maybe it needed more than a pound of butter. Yikes. So I'm going to put it together and I'll show you all the finished product, but I will answer that just while I'm mixing this together. Such a great question. No, not really. And that is because another one of my favorite research topics is the Radium Girls. And the Radium Girls, of course, from the early 1900s, they worked in the radium factory and radium painting, using radium lace paint to lip point these little paintbrushes in order to paint watch face dials for the men in World War I. And of course, at the time, they thought, oh, this is so great. Radium's supposed to be good for you, etc. And obviously, no, it's not. But they used to put it in everything, makeup, everything. You name it, they were trying to put radium in it. And it was very expensive. And so these girls ended up becoming known as the glowing girls, the shining girls, because they would go work all day in this factory, lip pointing and painting so that the watch face dials would glow or the airplane dials would glow, etc., for these soldiers. And then it was all up in the air. And so they would leave and they were like literally shining and glowing. And they're still glowing in their graves today. They died very horrific and painful deaths from radium necrosis, etc. So unpleasant. And ultimately, they filed lawsuits, etc., all that sort of thing. And due to time, I'll mix this up later and finish it. But you'll have a lovely best trim and pound cake with icing on top. So anyway, they used the experiences of these young ladies in order to come up with ways to make it safer to be around those types of elements. And so they implemented what they had learned from the Radium Girls experiences in order to make the Manhattan Project safe. So many of the women, no, did not have any sort of medical issues at all, actually, sadly and thankfully, just due to other experiences and learning from them. So, not really. They did
And you
not.
don't know if any first ladies followed up with these women after their work, correct?
Yeah, they did. I mean, I'm sure that they did. I don't. There's not really a lot about it. I did want to mention Jackie Kennedy specifically traveled to Oak Ridge as well when JFK was a senator. So she definitely went to Oak Ridge and toured the factories, which I meant to include in the PowerPoint, and I ran out of time, but they very much were aware of the work being done in those secret cities and whatnot. But it was just very much, I feel like, especially just being women and sort of that time period and what was talked about, that it wasn't as discussed how impactful what the women were doing at that time. Because like I was saying, that the Calitron girls, I mean, they were all, young ladies, high school, that outshone the scientists and what they really needed to be done on those machines that were instrumental and so vital. And so I feel like back at that time, sort of like with segregation and things, it just was, women weren't acknowledged as much. And so now it's sort of been something that's come more to light about how much they were doing as well, important tasks and jobs and things.
I
Yeah,
think that's a great point, Sarah. Especially when you think about movies like Hidden Figures, and for the longest time, people had never heard the name Katherine Johnson.
right.
So I think you make a very good point that we're in this really unique spot in history, especially where we're able to talk about these lesser known stories in such a nuanced way that really highlights their strengths, regardless of what was happening maybe in their era.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Uh, I know it is, I have gone over, but I really quick, this is Dot's coconut, toasted coconut pie, which I'll bake this one as well. I do have a finished one over here, but Dot was one of the Calitron girls. And she, excuse me, she, this, just, I just love that she's like, I'm never eating spam ever again. And I've never eaten, so I don't know, but I would completely agree with her and completely understand. But she does have a lovely coconut toasted coconut pie. And she also has one for a chicken and broccoli casserole, which if you would like to see that video, you can go to my social, but also that's also on the AMC YouTube channel as well. So a little bit more you can learn about her. She did volunteer at the American Museum of Science and Energy. And this pie, supposedly when she entertained or kind of from her family, was very requested, the most requests she got for foods. And the last thing, and it's not really a recipe. I don't think y'all got a recipe card for it, but it's just one of my favorite stories. So I'm just going to display it. Here we go. So Peg Jameson in Cooking Behind the Fence recalls their home as being this quote, 4 walls held together with optimism. All right. They lived super modestly, something like $4 that they only had for like 2 weeks. And just didn't make a lot of money, military. And they kind of had to borrow things from the cafeteria, silverware, etc. And they always had the intention of returning it or whatnot. They just didn't have anything, and they'd moved and whatnot. But they would make sauerkraut and wieners. And back in the day, they used to be dyed pink. So it would turn your sauerkraut pink. And so this is just an all beef hot and sauerkraut and pink food dye. And so, but they would eat it out of the lid of their pan because they didn't have plates or bowls. So it's just one of the other really fun, cool stories that I really have enjoyed cooking behind the fence. And I really look forward to more. And it's a little more difficult with the Los Alamos ladies. They're all referred to as Mrs. This person or that person. So it's a little more hard to research, as well as the newest Oak Ridge cookbook I came across. But I super look forward to continuing, of course, doing First Ladies and Ladies of the Manhattan Project and sharing women's history and pairing it with what everybody loves, food. So I just thanks y'all, and at Cooking with First Ladies on Instagram, www.cookingwithfirstladies.com. And again, you can head over to amse.org to get a cookbook if you are so inclined.
I think they're going to see a surge in sales, quite frankly, Sarah, because a lot of people were like, yeah, I can't find it anywhere. I've been waiting. I've been looking. Some people are actually visiting this summer. So I think it's great. Thank you for sharing that. And it's good for us to know, too, where these are coming from. And as an ex-chef, I definitely want to also own a cookbook. So I'm just going to have to give them a call real quick. So thank you all so much I agree. This was a very informative, delightful program. Thank you for sharing a unique aspect of women's history and how it kind of connects with our first ladies and celebrating Women's History Month with us. Thank you all for participating in the poll, for being so robust in our chat and our Q&A section. And of course, thank you to Debbie, our ASL interpreter based out of the UK, as well as to Sarah Morgan and Cooking with the First Ladies. I hope you all have a wonderful night. Happy Women's History Month, and we'll see you in the next program.
Oh, thanks y'all. Have a good night.